My sister laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. Not because I'd told a joke, but because I'd said I paid the bills. We were sitting around the dining room table at my parents' house, the Sunday dinner table where our family had gathered for years. The conversation had turned to finances, to who was managing what, to responsibilities and contributions. I'd mentioned quietly, almost as an afterthought, that I handled most of the household bills. Paige had been taking a sip of wine when I spoke. She choked on it, set down her glass and started laughing. That sharp, cruel laugh that I'd heard my entire life. The one that made me feel small and stupid and invisible. The dining room went quiet except for her laughter, echoing off the walls like it belonged there more than I did. My parents looked uncomfortable but said nothing. My brother-in-law smirked into his napkin. I felt heat crawl up my neck, spreading across my face like a stain. Paige wiped her eyes with her napkin and looked at me with a mixture of amusement and pity. "You," she said, still catching her breath from laughing. "Please." Something inside me cracked and stayed silent. I stared at the table, pretending to study a chip in the wood grain while my hands trembled in my lap. I pressed them together hard, trying to stop the shaking, trying to look calm when everything inside me was screaming. Everyone avoided my eyes. My mother suddenly became very interested in serving more mashed potatoes. My father cleared his throat and asked my brother-in-law about work. Nobody defended me. Nobody asked Paige why she was laughing. Nobody questioned whether what I'd said might actually be true. My sister leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, victorious. She was enjoying the moment like she'd earned it, like humiliating me was just another win in a game I didn't know we were playing. Her smile was wide and satisfied, the smile of someone who'd put me back in my place. I felt my face burning, felt the familiar weight of shame pressing down on my shoulders. And then I did what I'd always done. Smiled. A thin, obedient smile that tasted like blood because I was biting the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. A smile that said I accepted my role, that I wouldn't make things uncomfortable, that I understood I was the punchline. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't correct her. I wouldn't argue or defend myself. I wouldn't pull out bank statements or payment confirmations. I wouldn't explain how for the past 3 years, I'd been quietly covering bills that nobody else seemed to notice needed paying. I wouldn't list the utilities, the insurance, the property taxes, the subscription services, all running smoothly under my name and my card. I wouldn't mention the spreadsheet I kept, tracking every payment, every due date, every account number. I wouldn't show them the automated transfers I'd set up, the careful budgeting I'd done, the financial safety net I'd built while everyone assumed someone else was handling it. I wouldn't say any of that. Because here's what I understood at that moment, with my sister's laughter still ringing in my ears and my family's silence confirming my invisibility. Explaining wouldn't change anything. Words wouldn't convince people who'd spent years not seeing me. But reality would. Reality was patient. Reality didn't need me to defend it. Reality would speak for itself. I just had to get out of its way. So I let Paige have her moment. I let her believe her own lie. And I started planning. My name is Megan. I'm 31 years old. And I'm the oldest of 3 children. The reliable one. Quiet one. The one who solves problems without being asked. Who anticipates needs before anyone voices them. Who keeps things running smoothly in the background. For as long as I could remember, I'd been the person everyone counted on but nobody noticed. When I was 12 and my mother got sick, I learned to cook dinner for the family. When I was 16 and my father lost his job, I started working to help with groceries. When I was 22 and fresh out of college, I moved back home to help my parents get back on their feet financially. I'd learned early that being dependable meant being invisible. People noticed when things went wrong, but when everything worked smoothly, they assumed it just happened that way naturally. They never saw the effort, the planning, the constant vigilance required to keep everything running. And Paige, my younger sister by 3 years, had learned to take credit for things she'd never done. That night, sitting at the dinner table with my family's silence confirming what I'd always feared, I finally understood how invisible I'd allowed myself to become. How I'd trained them to overlook me, to assume my contributions didn't exist, to believe Paige's confident lies over my quiet truth. My sister Paige had always been the star. From the time we were children, she'd been the one everyone noticed. Louder, prettier, more outgoing. She knew how to command a room, how to tell a story that made people laugh, how to be the center of attention effortlessly. More successful was how my parents described her, even though we had similar jobs with similar pay. But Paige knew how to make her life sound impressive. She talked about her career like it was groundbreaking, her apartment like it was a palace, her social life like it was enviable. She told stories well, especially the ones where she played the hero. Stories about how she'd handled a crisis at work, how she'd helped a friend through a tough time, how she'd managed to keep our parents' household running smoothly. That last story was her favorite. She'd perfected the narrative over the years, adding details that made her sound competent and caring. She talked about coordinating repairs, managing finances, handling emergencies. She said it with such confidence that no one ever questioned it. Why would they? Confidence passes for truth when no one challenges it. And I was always there in the background cleaning up the actual messes. The ones nobody saw. The ones Paige never mentioned in her stories. It had started years earlier when money got tight. My parents had both been laid off within months of each other. They were drowning in bills they couldn't pay, struggling to keep the house, barely managing to put food on the table. I'd paid one bill just this once, using my credit card to cover the electric bill when they'd gotten a disconnection notice. Then another, the water bill. Then the property tax installment. Before I knew it, I was covering most of their monthly expenses. Quietly. Automatically. Never making a big deal about it because I didn't want them to feel bad. I'd set up automatic payments from my checking account. I'd linked their utility accounts to my email so I'd get the bills directly. I'd organized everything in a spreadsheet, color-coded by due date, tracking every payment down to the penny. My parents' financial situation had improved over the years. My father had found work again. My mother's small business was doing well. But somehow the bills had stayed in my name. The automatic payments had kept running. And I'd never mentioned it because it seemed easier to just keep handling it than to have an awkward conversation about transferring everything back. Paige had never noticed, because she'd never looked. She'd never asked who was paying for what. She'd just assumed someone was handling it, and eventually she'd started claiming she was that someone. At family gatherings, Paige talked about how she kept everything running. She'd lean back in her chair during dinner, wine glass in hand, and hold court about the responsibilities she managed. Someone has to make sure the bills get paid, she'd say with a knowing smile. Someone has to stay on top of the house stuff. It's a lot of work, but family comes first. She said it with such confidence, such casual authority, that confidence became proof. My parents would nod proudly, grateful to have such a responsible daughter. Friends and relatives would praise her for being so mature, so caring. My brother-in-law would give her an admiring look, impressed by her capability. And I would sit there, fork halfway to my mouth, words stuck in my throat like stones. I'd think about correcting her. I'd rehearse the words in my head. Actually, I'm the one who pays those bills. Actually, I've been covering the expenses for 3 years. Actually, Paige doesn't even know what accounts exist. But I never said anything. I swallowed my words like I always did. Washed them down with water or wine, let them settle heavy in my stomach. Because speaking up would make things uncomfortable. It would make me seem petty or jealous or like I was competing with Paige for attention. Better to stay quiet. Better to let it go. Better to be the bigger person. That night after dinner, I drove home in silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call a friend to vent. I just drove through the dark streets, replaying Paige's laugh over and over in my head. When I got to my apartment, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my laptop. I logged into my banking app and pulled up my account statements. Then I opened my file folder labeled Family, Bills, and started organizing. Payment histories going back 3 years. Utility bills in my name. Insurance policies listing me as the payer. Property tax records showing my bank account as the payment source. Subscription services, streaming, security system, lawn care, pest control, all running on my credit card. Everything was in black and white. Every transaction documented. Every payment recorded. Every account clearly showing my name, my email, my payment information. I created a new spreadsheet, more detailed than the one I'd been using to track due dates. This one showed dates, amounts, account names, confirmation numbers. I color-coded it by category and added up the totals. In 3 years, I'd paid nearly $40,000 in bills for my parents' house. Bills that Paige claimed she was handling. Bills that she'd somehow convinced everyone she was responsible for. I saved the spreadsheet and closed my laptop. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My breathing was steady. Felt calm. Clear. Certain. Had a plan. I wasn't interested in humiliating Paige or exposing her publicly. I just wanted distance. Space from people who didn't see me, who didn't value me, who let my sister laugh at me without question. I wanted to stop carrying weight for people who'd convinced themselves I wasn't carrying anything. The plan was simple. I would stop. Stop paying bills that weren't mine. Stop providing services nobody acknowledged. Stop being the invisible solution to problems nobody knew existed. I started that night. I logged into each account and turned off autopay. The utilities, the insurance, the subscriptions. I canceled the automatic payments from my account. I left the services running. I didn't disconnect anything or close any accounts. I just stopped paying. I set up email filters to send any payment failed notifications to a folder I'd check weekly. I wanted to know when things started falling apart, but I didn't want the constant notifications to make me feel guilty. Then I sat back and waited. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was just tired of saving people who laughed at me. I was tired of being the foundation nobody built on, the solution nobody credited, the work nobody noticed until it stopped. For the first few weeks, nothing changed. The house ran smoothly. Too smoothly. Everything kept working because most bills were monthly, and I'd paid them before stopping the autopay. The lights stayed on. The water ran. The internet worked. The security system is armed and disarmed like always. To everyone in the family, everything seemed normal. Perfect even. And Paige bragged louder than ever. At a family barbecue 2 weeks after that dinner, she was telling a story about coordinating a repair on the house. The AC went out last month, she was saying to a group of relatives. Can you believe that? Middle of summer. I had to find a contractor fast, get multiple quotes, negotiate a fair price. It's exhausting, but somebody has to handle these things. I stood by the cooler getting a drink and listened. She was describing a repair I'd actually coordinated and paid for weeks earlier, before I'd stopped the autopay. But in Paige's version, she was the hero who'd saved the day. I said nothing. My silence felt different this time though. Not weak or accommodating. Powerful. I was watching a performance, knowing the truth, waiting for the curtain to fall. And I had all the time in the world. The first crack appeared during a family visit 4 weeks after I'd stopped the payments. We were gathered at my parents' house for my father's birthday. Dinner was over, and we'd moved to the living room for coffee and cake. Paige was in the middle of another story when the lights flickered. Just once, but noticeably. Everyone paused. The lights steadied, and after a moment, conversations resumed. Paige laughed and made a joke about cheap wiring. But I'd seen it, that half-second where her confidence wobbled. Her eyes had darted to the ceiling, then to my parents, then back to her audience. For just a moment she'd looked uncertain. Then her smile snapped back into place like a mask, and she continued her story with even more energy than before. She still believed her own lie. She still thought everything was running smoothly because of her. She hadn't connected the flickering lights to unpaid bills, hadn't considered that the seamless household she'd been taking credit for might require actual payments she knew nothing about. But I'd seen the crack, and I knew more were coming. 2 days later I got the notification. I was at work, sitting in a meeting when my phone buzzed. I glanced at it discreetly under the table. An email in my filtered folder, the one collecting all the payment failed notices. This one was from the electric company. Past due. Service interruption scheduled in 7 days if payment wasn't received. I closed the email app and set my phone face down on the table. My hands were steady. My heart rate was normal. I felt no panic, no guilt, no urge to immediately fix the problem. I'd spent 3 years preventing problems nobody knew existed. I'd spent 3 years being the invisible safety net catching falls nobody noticed. I was done. After the meeting, I checked the email again. Clear, professional language. Count in my name. Billing address for my parents' house. Amount due plus late fee. I archived the email and went back to work. That night, I didn't call anyone. I didn't warn my parents or give Paige a heads up. I just went home, made dinner, and watched TV. Normal life. Except everything had changed. The countdown had started. In 7 days, unless someone else made a payment they didn't know needed making, the truth would start speaking for itself. And I wouldn't say a word. The phone call came 5 days later during Sunday brunch. We were back at my parents' house, the same dining room where Paige had laughed at me. I was helping my mother bring out platters of food when Paige's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "Unknown number," she muttered, but answered anyway. "Hello." We all watched as her expression changed. Confusion first, then concern, then something like panic. "What? No, that can't be right." Her voice had gone up an octave. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Everyone at the table turned to look at her. "There must be some mistake," Paige was saying into the phone. "I don't understand what you're—" She stopped listening. The color was draining from her face. My mother set down the serving spoon. "Paige, what's wrong?" My father leaned forward, concerned. My brother-in-law looked confused. Paige covered the phone with her hand, her eyes wide. They say the electric bill hasn't been paid. That the account holder hasn't made payment in over a month." The words hung in the air. Heavy. Confusing. Because according to Paige's stories, she was the one handling all of this. "That's impossible," my father said. "Paige, didn't you pay it?" Paige's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. No sound came out. My mother asked again. "What's wrong, honey? Who is it?" Paige uncovered the phone, staring at it like it had betrayed her. "It's the electric company. They say the account is past due. That they're going to disconnect service tomorrow if they don't receive payment." The room felt smaller suddenly. "Utter." My father stood up. "Let me talk to them." Paige handed him the phone, her hand shaking. My father put it on speaker. "Hello, this is Thomas Bennett. I'm the homeowner. Can you explain what's happening?" The customer service representative spoke in a calm, professional tone. "Yes, Mr. Bennett. The account for your address is currently past due by 43 days. We've sent multiple notices to the account holder, but haven't received payment. Service is scheduled for disconnection tomorrow unless the outstanding balance is paid." "Who is the account holder?" my father asked, his face flushed. "Just a moment." The sound of typing. "The account is under the name Megan Bennett." The room went completely silent. Every head turned toward me. I was standing by the buffet, holding a dish of roasted vegetables, my face neutral. The representative continued. "We've been sending emails to the address on file, but haven't received a response. Is Ms. Bennett available?" I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just stood there, letting the truth stand up on its own. It didn't need my help. The voice on the speaker said my name again, clear and professional and unmistakable. "We need to speak with Megan Bennett regarding the past due account. Is she available?" My father looked at me, his expression confused. "Megan, the electric bill is in your name." I set down the dish carefully. "Yes." "Since when?" 3 years. The number landed like a bomb. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My brother-in-law's eyebrows shot up. "And Paige?" Paige was staring at me like she was seeing a stranger. Someone she'd never met before. Someone who'd been standing in front of her all along, invisible. 3 years, my father repeated. But Paige said she was handling. He trailed off, looking at my sister. Paige's face had gone from pale to splotchy. I thought. I've been. She couldn't finish a sentence. The representative spoke again, patient but firm. The current balance is $218, including late fees. Can we process payment today? My father fumbled for his wallet. Yes, of course. I'll pay it right now. As he read his credit card information to the representative, the room remained silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was my father's voice, apologizing for the confusion, assuring them it wouldn't happen again. When he hung up, the silence was even heavier. Paige laughed once, a sharp, brittle sound that had nothing to do with humor, then stopped abruptly. She really looked at me for the first time in years. You pay the electric bill? She asked, her voice small. Yes. For how long? 3 years. Like I said. She shook her head like she could shake away the truth. But I thought. Dad always said. You always said, I corrected quietly. You said you handled the bills. You said you kept everything running. You said it so many times you started believing it. My mother was looking between us, trying to piece things together. Megan, have you been paying other bills too? Most of them. The words came out simple. Factual. Most of them, my father repeated. Which ones? The electric, the water, the gas. Property taxes. Homeowners insurance. Internet. Security system. Pest control. Lawn service. I counted them off on my fingers, watching their faces change with each item. For 3 years. Yes. Paige had nothing to say. For the first time in her life, my sister, who always had a story, always had an explanation, always had a way to spin things in her favor, stood there completely silent. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just calm, clear, free. My parents started asking questions all at once. When did this start? Why did I start paying? How much had I spent? Why didn't I say anything? It started when you both lost your jobs, I explained, my voice steady. You got a disconnection notice for the electric. Paid it just that once. Then the water bill came due and you didn't have the money, so I paid that too. Then property taxes, insurance, everything else. But our situation improved, my father said. I found work. Your mother's business took off. We could have started paying again. I know. But the bills were already in my name. The autopay was already set up. It seemed easier to just keep handling it than to have an awkward conversation about transferring everything back. My mother's eyes were wet. Megan, why didn't you tell us? I tried to a few times, but it never seemed like the right moment. And then Paige started talking about how she handled everything, and I paused, choosing my words carefully. I didn't want to make things uncomfortable. Paige tried to interrupt. I never said I paid the bills. I said I handled coordinating things, managing the household, making sure everything ran smoothly. That's not what you said, my brother-in-law spoke up quietly. Everyone looked at him. At our wedding, you told my parents you managed all the family finances. You made it sound like you were supporting mom and dad. Paige's face flushed. I didn't mean it like that. They misunderstood. But her voice cracked when she said it. No one backed her up. My father was looking at Paige with an expression I'd never seen before. Disappointment mixed with something else. Understanding, maybe. He was piecing together all the stories she'd told, all the claims she'd made, and comparing them to the truth that had just revealed itself. Paige, he said slowly. Have you been taking credit for things you didn't do? No. I assumed someone was paying and I helped with other stuff like coordinating repairs and I coordinated the AC repair, I said quietly. The one you told everyone about at the barbecue. I found the contractor, got the quotes, scheduled everything. And paid for it. Paige stared at me. How much have you spent? My mother asked, her voice barely a whisper. About $40,000 over 3 years. The number hung in the air. $40,000. While Paige had been telling stories about what a responsible daughter she was, I'd been quietly spending my salary to keep my parents' house running. While she'd been taking bows for work she'd never done, I'd been the one actually doing it. Megan, that's... My father couldn't finish. Paige tried one more time to deflect. This is just a misunderstanding. A miscommunication. I never meant to imply I was paying the actual bills. I was talking about helping in other ways. But every word she spoke made things worse. Because we all knew the truth now. The image she'd built, of the capable, responsible daughter who held everything together, was collapsing in real time. I spoke calmly one final time to make everything clear. I'm not trying to embarrass you, Paige. I'm just tired of being invisible while you take credit for my work. Pay the bills. Coordinate the repairs. And manage the accounts. I've done it quietly for 3 years because I didn't want to make things awkward or uncomfortable. I paused, looking around the table at my family. But last month, when I mentioned it at dinner, you laughed. You laughed so hard you cried, because the idea that I might be contributing something meaningful was hilarious to you. Paige stared at the floor, her face burning. I'm done being invisible, I continued. I turned off the autopay 3 weeks ago. Not to punish anyone, but because I can't keep supporting people who don't see me. Who won't see me, even when I'm standing right in front of them. My mother was crying now. Megan, I'm so sorry. We should have noticed. We should have asked. You should have, I agreed. But you didn't, because it was easier to believe Paige's stories than to look closely at what was actually happening. I picked up my purse from the side table. I'm going to email you all the account information, the passwords, the payment schedules. Everything you need to take over. The bills are your responsibility now. My father stood. Megan, please. Let us pay you back. $40,000. I don't want the money back, I said. I want you to see me. Really see me. And understand what I've been doing all this time while you were celebrating, Paige. I walked toward the door. Paige finally spoke, her voice broken. I'm sorry. I stopped at the doorway and looked back at my sister. Are you sorry you took credit for my work? Or are you sorry you got caught? She didn't answer. My parents didn't apologize right away either. They stood there in their dining room, surrounded by the remains of Sunday brunch, processing the truth they'd been blind to for years. But their silence was different now. Heavy with realization. Uncomfortable with guilt. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one carrying that weight. They were. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. Over the next few weeks, my parents tried to call several times. I let most of the calls go to voicemail. When I did answer, the conversations were stilted, awkward. They wanted to know how to access accounts, how to set up payments, how to handle things I'd been managing. I sent them detailed instructions via email. Professional, clear, distant. I didn't offer to help beyond that. They wanted to talk about what happened, about Paige, about family dynamics. I told them I needed space. Time to figure out what kind of relationship I wanted with people who'd let me be invisible for so long. My mother cried on the phone. My father said he understood but hoped we could work through this. I didn't promise anything. I just said I'd call when I was ready. Paige moved out of my parents' house 6 weeks after the phone call incident. I heard about it through my mother, who called to let me know. She said she needed her own space, my mother explained, her voice careful. She found an apartment across town. What my mother didn't say, but what I understood, was that living at home had become uncomfortable for Paige. The praise she'd thrived on had evaporated. The admiration she'd cultivated was gone. Every time my parents looked at her, they saw the gap between the image she'd projected and the reality she'd hidden. They didn't trust her the same way anymore. Through mutual friends, I heard that Paige had become quieter at social gatherings. She didn't tell stories about managing family responsibilities anymore. She didn't volunteer information about her life. When people asked about our parents, she gave brief answers and changed the subject. The confidence she'd worn like armor had cracked, and she didn't know how to function without it. I didn't feel triumphant about this. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied. I just felt distant. Like I was watching someone I used to know struggling with consequences they'd created for themselves. My parents started asking questions she couldn't answer. How do I access the property tax portal? What company do we use for pest control? When is the insurance policy up for renewal? All questions I could have answered immediately. All questions Paige couldn't answer at all. I spent the next several months setting boundaries I'd never had before. I transferred every account back to my parents' names. I unlinked my email from their utilities, their insurance, their services. I removed my credit card from their autopay systems. I created a final spreadsheet with every account, every password, every payment schedule, and emailed it to my father with clear instructions. Then I archived that folder on my computer. Closed that chapter. When my parents asked for help beyond that, when my mother called asking me to explain a confusing bill, when my father wanted advice on switching internet providers, I politely declined. That's not my responsibility anymore. I'd say gently but firmly. You'll need to figure it out or hire someone to help. The guilt I expected never came. I thought I'd feel bad, abandoning people who'd raised me, leaving them to struggle. But instead I felt free. Lighter. Like I'd put down weight I was never meant to carry in the first place. I started saving money. Real money, without a constant drain of someone else's expenses. I paid down my credit card debt. I built an emergency fund. I started planning for things I wanted. Travel, maybe grad school, definitely better boundaries in all my relationships. And I slept better. No more waking up at 3 a.m. to worry about whether I'd paid something on time. No more checking accounts and tracking due dates. Just sleep. Deep, peaceful sleep. At the next family gathering, Thanksgiving, 6 months after the phone call, Paige barely spoke. She arrived alone, her boyfriend conveniently working that day. She helped in the kitchen when asked but didn't volunteer stories or observations. She sat at the dinner table quietly, eating, responding to direct questions with brief answers. No jokes about household management. No stories about her responsibilities. No claims about keeping everything running smoothly. She didn't look at me during the meal. Not once. And I didn't need her to. I didn't need an apology or acknowledgement or some dramatic reconciliation scene. I'd said what I needed to say. The truth had spoken for itself. Anything else was her burden to carry, not mine. My parents were different too. Warmer toward me, more attentive. They asked about my job, my life, my plans. They listened when I talked instead of waiting for their turn to speak. They thanked me for the wine I brought, for helping set the table, for staying to help clean up. Small things, but noticeable. My mother hugged me when I left and whispered, "I'm sorry we didn't see you before." It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. As I drove home that night, I thought about how much had changed. Not just in my family but in me. I'd spent years making myself small, quiet, invisible. I'd trained people to overlook me. And then I'd been shocked when they did exactly that. The months continued, and my life settled into a new rhythm. I got promoted at work, finally going for opportunities I'd been too tired to pursue before. I traveled to places I'd only dreamed about. I started dating someone who noticed me, who saw my contributions without me having to point them out. I saved more money than I ever had, building a financial cushion that felt like armor, like protection against ever being taken advantage of again. I slept better, woke up easier, moved through my days without the constant background anxiety of managing someone else's chaos. I stood straighter, spoke more directly, took up more space in rooms I'd once tried to blend into. Being seen wasn't the reward. I'd learned that the hard way. People seeing you, acknowledging you, valuing you, that was nice, but it wasn't the goal. The reward was internal. It was knowing my worth without needing external validation. It was understanding that my value didn't depend on how much I did for others. It was recognizing that being invisible wasn't humble or noble or selfless. It was self-abandoning. And I was done abandoning myself for people who didn't notice I was gone. My relationship with my parents slowly improved. We had dinner once a month. We talked on the phone weekly. We were rebuilding something, but it was different now. Bounded. Clear. They didn't ask me for help with things they could handle themselves. I didn't volunteer to fix problems that weren't mine. We existed together in a new way. One where I was visible, valued, but not responsible for everything. Paige and I didn't rebuild our relationship. We were cordial at family events, civil in group texts, pleasant when we accidentally ran into each other. But the sisterhood we'd once had, or that I'd thought we had, was gone. Maybe it had never existed. Maybe I'd just been so busy being useful that I'd mistaken being needed for being loved. She'd laughed because she believed I was invisible. She'd laughed because in her world, the idea of me contributing something meaningful was absurd. She'd laughed because I'd let her see me as background, as peripheral, as someone who could be safely dismissed. She stopped laughing when the truth spoke for itself. When reality did what my words never could. Shattered the illusion she'd built and forced everyone to see what had been there all along. But I didn't win by embarrassing her. I didn't win by exposing her lies or making her look bad. I won by knowing my worth. By refusing to keep paying the price, financially, emotionally, spiritually, for someone else's ego. By understanding that being seen isn't something you earn through usefulness. It's something you claim through self-respect. The phone call had changed everything. But not because it exposed Paige. 'Cause it freed me. From the need to prove myself. From the hope that if I just did enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, people would finally notice me. From the belief that love meant making myself small so others could feel big. I'd spent 31 years being invisible. And then, in one moment, in one phone call that said my name clear and professional and unmistakable, I'd become visible. Not because anyone else chose to see me, but because I finally chose to see myself.